Like so many that come out of abusive backgrounds, fear so ruled my life that nothing about it seemed unusual. I was raised by a schizophrenic father who used to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, and he was so out of touch with reality and life that by the end of my sophomore year, he was charged with 9 counts of rape and sexual abuse. And my mother had left me with this man at 14 months of age. She just completely walked away from all of her children. And I kind of look at my life in the context of an old country saying that talks about how to boil a frog. And what it says is, if you want to boil a frog, you're not going to put the frog in a pot of boiling water. He's just going to jump out. Now what you do is you put the frog in tepid water, and you slowly increase the heat. And by the time the frog realizes what is going on, he's cooked. I could have been that frog. Except for the grace of God and choices that a few people made in my life, I got out. I lost track of how many times my dad had been arrested when I was little, mainly from him getting liquored up or feeling like someone had offended him in some way, and he would take out his guns and shoot them off. And, you know, us kids, we were always right there in the middle of it, and it's a miracle that we never ever got shot. Well, my stepmother's family lived on the hill right across from our small farm, and when she would get really, really fed up with my dad, she would retreat to the safety of that house. And of course, my dad would always follow, angry and demanding that she come back, you know, screaming. Well, when I was about 6, one of those episodes happened, and so he loads us kids into the van, and up the hill we go, and he had a couple of his guns with him, and he stood in front of the house, shooting off the guns, demanding that she come out, and us kids that were in the van, we were just mortified, scared. We didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, here he was shooting off guns and screaming at our stepmom, and it was very frightening. Well, they called the police, and when the police got there, us kids were so afraid of what was going to happen that we covered up his guns in the van. And after they arrested him, they searched the van and realized that the guns were there, and he got an additional charge of concealed weapons. Well, another time, my dad was missing for 3 hours. And he ended up being in the hayloft of our barn, totally stoned out of his mind. And he came back to the house, and my stepmom, realizing that, you know, he's having an episode, she calls for an ambulance, and she actually had to try to hold him down, and my 10-year-old sister had to help hold my dad down. And I remember I was standing back and just watching this. And my dad was saying, the aliens are coming, we've got to go. And he just kept talking about that. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, they're going to take my dad away. Is he going to come back? And, you know, what about the aliens? Are the aliens coming? I didn't know. Well, he could take, even sober, a really beautiful moment, and he could just grind it to hell. One time he had decided he was going to breed German Shepherds. So he bought this beautiful female, Smokey, and us kids adored her. And then he bred her, and when she was ready to deliver her puppies, we were so excited, us kids, we just gathered around, and we just watched in awe as Smokey lovingly gave birth to her puppies. And it was such a wonder until my dad stepped in. One by one, he removed the females from the males, and he put the females in a bag, and he walked behind the barn and he buried them alive. We just wailed. We were crying, and we were begging him to go back and dig back up the puppies. Well, he wasn't going to, so all night we cried. No matter how much he beat us, we just kept begging, please, Dad, go dig up the puppies. So finally, by the morning, he relented, and he went back out and he dug back up the puppies. Some lived, but some died. It was that kind of situations of terror and moments of fear that just constantly kept me on edge. But it never occurred to me that it wasn't normal. I mean, didn't every kid get woken up in the middle of the night from their dad talking about how an angel had given him a message, or, the aliens are coming, or, hey, I found the secret meaning in the Bible. I mean, everybody didn't go through that? Well, I can go on to explain to you about how my stepmom left, leaving the remaining kids with my dad, and how the abuse escalated. And I could even explain to you how we lived for a time in a house with no furniture. But just know that the abuse just escalated. It got phenomenally worse. Well, one of my escapes when I was 13 is I'd go roller skating. And my dad didn't care what I did. He didn't care where I was or who I was with, so I would find my way at 13 to the roller rink, and I would find my way back, and I would bum the money to actually get in. I did this every weekend, every Friday and Saturday night. And, at midnight on a Friday and Saturday night, being a 13-year-old, it was kind of sketchy getting my rides home. One particular time, a friend of mine said, oh, yeah, sure, my mom will take you home. So I jump in the car, and I was so happy to have a ride home, but I was really unprepared for what I seen. The mother was talking to her daughter and asking her, so how was your night? And she would listen, and she seemed to really care about her daughter, and she'd even come out at midnight to pick up her daughter, and I was so mesmerized by the normal way it was, and that the mother actually loved her daughter. And I remember thinking, God, my life is so stark, and its differences. It's completely different, and you have everything I want. That's normal. Well, we ended up going to the long road down to my house, and I happened to see my dad's van on the side of the road, a little bit askew, and I said to the mother, I said, oh, wait, that's my dad. You can let me out. It's okay. So the mother lets me out, and I run to the van, to the passenger side door, and as soon as I opened it, I knew something was wrong. I could smell it. I could smell the liquor. I knew something was wrong. Well, I watched as the car pulled away, and I'm looking at the tail lights thinking, there goes normal. There goes everything I want. And I'm with the monster, this awful monster. So I get in the van, and my dad throws me the lid to a liquor bottle that he had with him, and he said, there, you're the devil. We're going to die. And he slams on the gas pedal, and he starts careening towards this tall embankment to kill us. Well, I lifted up on the handle and jump out, and I land in a ditch, and I totally gash up my leg, and I watch as he's just careening towards this steep embankment, and right before he hit, he stopped. And everything was quiet, and I just watched as he eventually made his way back onto the road, and he pulled away, and I ran the other way. I was not going back with him. And so I ended up crossing a 4-lane highway to a Wendy's restaurant, and I called my grandmother, and I ended up staying with her for 2 weeks till my dad decided it was time for me to come home. Well, it was situations like that, the normal that would hit me when I got in high school. I would see parents that would come to their kids' events, and they would cheer them on, and I thought, wow, they actually came. Or they would speak lovingly to their children, and instead of telling them, oh, you're stupid. Or, they would hug them instead of punching them in the mouth. Because my dad had always led me to believe all fathers abused their daughters. All mothers were drunks. And I was starting to see that just wasn't the case. So I started to question, if that's not right, what else has he told me that isn't right? So I really started to question those things. Well, when I started getting friends in high school and I would bring them home, my dad really started taking an interest in them. He would take an interest in my friends and my brother's girlfriends that he would date. And he kind of started letting them drink in the apartment. And then he'd let them have drugs in the apartment, or if the girls and the boyfriends wanted to have sex in the apartment, he'd let them do that. Well, I became known as the girl with the cool dad. And it was so not the case. But, they thought, oh, I have all this freedom, I've got this great dad. Well, he slowly and methodically started a seduction with each new little freedom he gave them, they kind of gave him a little bit of trust. And it wasn't a race. It was a methodical creep to where he got to the eventual finish line of rape. Well, one time a popular girl came to the apartment, and it was a cheerleader, no less. I mean, I knew her, but I didn't hang with her, of course. And, she came with a friend of hers, and I don't know if it was morbid curiosity or what it was. A lot of kids knew about what was going on in that apartment. But she came with this friend, and they sat with my dad drinking, and he thought, okay, I'm going to call a friend of mine. So he calls a friend of his over, and when they thought it was the right time, they decided they were going to have fun with the girls. Well, they completely freaked out. They had no idea that this was going on. And so I take them and I run into the bedroom and I shut the door. And I remember my dad was banging so hard on the door that it was just literally moving. The whole top of it was moving. He was pounding so hard he wanted them to come out. And they were terrified. The looks on their faces that they had when they looked at me. They were looking to me for protection. And I was, I'm 14 years old. What could I do? And it was that moment that my shell of protection just kind of started to shatter just a little bit. And I remember sitting there telling them, oh, I'm so sick of my life. I'm so tired of my life. Living here is miserable, and I just want to kill myself. And I couldn't believe I was telling them this, sitting there in that dark bedroom, them terrified and me just ready to die. But I did. And it was after a time when I didn't hear any more noise or movement. We figured they had passed out, so I snuck them out. Well, not long after that, as I was in high school, I got called out of class, and I was taken to an office next to the principal's office. And I met this really nice lady, and she was a social worker. And I would learn later that the cheerleader's mother had called social services. And this lady she was small and petite, and she was so motherly, and she spoke to me so gently, and that it just really disarmed me. And I was already feeling just, sick of life and sick of everything that was going on. So when she asked me questions, I answered honestly, which at that point only consisted of, does your dad allow them to party in the apartment? To which I said, yeah. Well, later that night, I tossed and I turned. I thought, oh my God, I've betrayed my dad. So the next day, I call and I say, look, if you tell anyone what I said, I'm going to deny it all. And she just very knowingly said, okay, Jen, okay. And I thought, woo, I have dodged a bullet. Well, that, ended up not being the case. Well, my dad had gotten wind not long after that he was being investigated. So he sends me and my brother to the back parking lot with this box full of pictures, and he said, you need to burn all of these. I had no idea exactly what we were doing, but as we're burning these pictures, my insides were coming out because I was looking at the eyes and the bodies of all these girls that I knew. And we just burned all of this evidence. And it just made me sick. Well, one day when I came home from high school, there are police cruisers all over the front of the apartment building in which we lived. And, I kind of knew what was going on. And I made my way up the stairs, and I was greeted by a police officer, and he said, who are you? And I said, well, I live in that apartment that you're in. And he let me come close, and, the police are tearing through everything. They're going through every drawer, every little thing. I mean, just ransacking the whole apartment. And there sat my dad in handcuffs. And he said, can I speak to her? And they said yes. So he comes out in handcuffs, and like he kept saying, I didn't do this. I'm innocent. They're just out to get me. I didn't do anything. You know that. And my insides just roared with this emotion. It wasn't even words. I just couldn't believe that he was telling me that because I knew he was guilty. And I watched as they put my dad in a cruiser, and he pulled away. And I had such a mixed emotion. There was part of me that was like, wow, I'm so relieved. I don't have to live with that monster anymore. And then there was the other side of me. It was like, oh my God, I'm on my own. What do I do? So why am I telling my story? Why am I standing up here sharing this with you? Well, I don't want pity. No, what I want you to know is I survived and I made it out because people chose not to look away and actually got involved. And so if you're in an abusive situation, I would just like to say to you, there's hope. You can get out. There is a way out of the darkness that threatens to swallow you whole. And if you're someone that may happen to see a young person in need, I would hope and encourage you to step out of your comfort zone and point them to a way out of the darkness. Thank you.